So thank you for joining. This is we're closing into the last part of the program for today, where we get the keynote presentation conversation that I'm personally very excited about. Today we talked a lot about, first of all, new methods of like documenting experimental technologies on like dance floors. We talked about fragile ecologies. We talked about a lot of urgent topics that actually implore us to take care, very simply, and take a form of radical care. And if we look at where we are in the world right now, we are, I really like the term that is here, it's polycrises, right? We are juggling between humanitarian, environmental, personal. We're in a culture where attention is really weaponized. We're in a culture where burnout is quite common. And we really need, again, a different story about how we should take care. And in this world that is shaped by escalating crises, extractive systems, widening inequalities, writer and scholar Dean Spade invites us to think about collective care, mutual aid, and community-based forms of resistance, and how these can actually shy away from maybe the trap of resisting by proxy. And if you look at kind of the Western citizen now and a lot of the citizens of the world, the options that you're given, you're handed out, are okay, you can vote, you can post on social media, you can donate to an NGO. All of these are actions by proxy. So there is a flip side to that. There is a form of resistance that is based on what we can deem as fragile forces as well. So if you think of interdependence, softness, shared responsibility, everyday or day-to-day acts of solidarity, and this is the kind of reservoir we want to tap into tonight. So those of you who don't know, Dean Spade has been working to build queer and trans liberation, to end policing, border enforcement, and war for the past 25 years. Prolific writer, he's the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of the Law, and the book that I think will be discussed a bit more today, which is Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During this Crisis and the Next. Also the director of Pinkwashing Exposed, Seattle Fights Back, which can be watched online with English captions and subtitles in several languages. His newest book, called Love in a Fucked Up World, How to Build Relationships, Hook Up, and Raise Hell Together. And he will be responded to by Rachael Rakes, which is here, just walked in, who is also prolific curator, writer, editor, film programmer, amongst many things, also educator in Amsterdam, sometimes in New York City, just to name a few things, artistic director of the 12th Seoul Media City Biennale, editor at large for Verso Books, contributing editor for Infrasonica, committee member of the New York Film Festival, co-curator of the Festival of the Arts of the Real. Yeah, and there's a lot more. But we'll be in conversation after the keynote. So sit back, enjoy, we'll have a conversation, we'll have time to ask questions afterwards. And I'm just as excited as you hopefully are. Thanks a lot. A big round of applause for Dean Spade, who's joining us remotely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. I'm really excited to be with you all. Very sad that I can't be there in person. I'm going to share some slides that might help us come into a conversation about these themes of the festival that I think are really beautiful and important. Okay, so I wanted to show some images at first. Maybe you've seen some of these images in the news. These are recent events in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the US, where people have been fighting back against this massive ramp up of immigration enforcement. This is an image of people showing up to a raid where the immigration authority was raiding a workplace. We saw a lot of images like this of these agents in the streets and people trying to stop them from abducting people. At the same time, we saw a lot of people joining mutual aid efforts to bring, help get kids to school, to bring neighbors food, to try to get nurses and doctors to visit people in their homes because they couldn't leave their homes without risking being arrested and imprisoned and deported. So we saw this like two-pronged thing. They're like directly fighting back against the immigration police and trying to stop them, following their cars, getting in their way, things like that. And also trying to, get the hotels that they were staying in to not let them stay there. Like, lots of different efforts to try to stop them. And then also lots of efforts to take care of the people who are targeted by them. Some other examples of mutual aid that I just want to like kind of put into our view, images that maybe you saw like this in 2020. This is from New York City. There was these just like so many images circulating of people gathering food and sharing food, bringing food to community centers, distributing it at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. These are kind of classic images. A lot of people first heard the term mutual aid during this time. A lot of people created these free fridges. These are from New York City. Maybe you saw some images like this. They're very beautifully decorated, kept them stocked with food that anyone could come and take. Another very common mutual aid practice is these people are street medics. They are supporting people who are out protesting. They're treating someone in this image for tear gas injury from the police. They often give out masks and water. They treat people who are attacked by counter protesters or the police. Kind of oftentimes these people are not professional healthcare providers. They've been trained in the community. Sometimes they also have a job as a professional healthcare provider, and they make it more possible or more safe for people to fight the cops in the streets or fight the right wing in the streets. This image is also from 2020, actually. This is from Seattle. I don't know how much this news reached people in Amsterdam, but there was a period where there was a police-free zone in Seattle, in my neighborhood, where the cops had left the precinct, and there kind of became like this environment where people were hanging out. And the reason I'm sharing this image is because oftentimes when our people occupy space in a city, what it looks like is a bunch of mutual aid tables, like people giving away food. There was like a lot of people, you could get clothes, or people doing free mental health support. You could get your haircuts. There was like, people doing big art build projects together. This is kind of what the infrastructure of liberated zones often looks like in our communities, is just free stuff being given out, between people. Sometimes you have free libraries very commonly pop up in these kinds of spaces. Another place we see mutual aid represented a lot is disaster zones. This is an image from a very serious fire in Northern California. People were living in the parking lot of a Walmart. You can see how much smoke is in the air, and people giving each other blankets and tents and food and all the essentials to live together. Another disaster zone photo. This is a hurricane in the southern United States. People are rescuing each other by boat. Another kind of mutual aid that we see. It's a historical image. This is an image about the Black Panther Party's free health clinics. They had free health clinics all over the US. It was a program of the party, and oftentimes they were in trailers like this. So some of these clinics were also part of anti-gentrification efforts, like they were trying to stop a freeway building project through a Black neighborhood, and they would like put their health clinic as a trailer in the way of the project. So there was an interesting like combination of caring for community and stopping violence against people. Another example I like to share, needle exchange. This was a flyer from the 1990s, Kingston, New York. This kind of service was illegal at the time, and people were risking criminalization to support each other to prevent HIV in the community. This project, I just feel very moved by every time I think of it. The Confess Project, it's throughout various southern states in the US. It's focused on the fact that mental health support is often not very available for Black men. That's how they started. And so they trained barbers to provide non-professional mental health support, since people do spend a lot of time in barbershops who might not otherwise seek out mental health support, and to help people assess whether they needed to seek out further support. And eventually they also expanded to train beauty shop workers to try to reach more Black women. It's just like a very beautiful example of like really bringing something people need to where they are. Um, I think it's always important to talk about how mutual aid work often involves and includes rule breaking and law breaking. I love this image. I always share it. Stop believing in authority, start believing in each other. To me, this is like the center of um, what we really need to do in this moment. So I'll share this historical image of these young people who were providing abortions to people who needed them when it was illegal in the United States in a different way than it is now, and some overlap, and were arrested for it. I also think their story is interesting because at the beginning, when they started their abortion service, they were connecting people to doctors who would then provide the abortions. But eventually they tired of working with the doctors who were mostly men and mostly disconnected from their communities and didn't treat people the way they wanted. And so they learned how to do the abortions themselves. And to me, that is a really interesting progression in terms of deprofessionalizing care, which is an important part of mutual aid work. Another example of breaking the law to support each other. These are people who are, it's January 2020 in this image, and they are in Echo Park in Los Angeles. And at the time, the city of Los Angeles was trying to clear unhoused people who were camping in the park. So they would regularly send in these yellow sanitation trucks to, sweep up people's tents and move them away. And people organized to block the trucks. Like they were able to figure out the schedule when the trucks were going to come and block them. And it was an ongoing effort of really significant organizing. And after a while, the city stopped trying to enforce this and stopped sending sanitation trucks. And a very vibrant encampment sprung up in Echo Park where people were, sharing food and clothing. There was solar showers set up and ways to charge your phone. And it was like a very important space for support for unhoused people in Los Angeles. And in March 2021, the city spent $2 million to have a very militarized raid of the encampment. Thousands of people showed up to try to stop it. They arrested a lot of people. They raided the camp and cleared it. And they erected a 16-mile fence all the way around the park, which stood for years. So I think that just really shows us the stakes of how much they don't want us to take up space together and care for one another, how important it is to criminalize that. And this is a project that was happening for a few years in Oakland, Moms for Housing. This is where these Black moms who were unhoused took over vacant properties in some vacant apartments in Oakland. You can see in the upper picture there are a lot of their allies standing outside all night trying to guard the space. And these are the police that were sent to raid them. So again, just thinking about the stakes of this for the government, the significant interest in preventing people from caring for themselves and giving each other what we need to survive. So all of that, just to kind of populate your mind with images of the range of things mutual aid is, I want to tell you how I define the term. For me, mutual aid includes three elements. One is that if we think about all the things we do in our movements to resist, mutual aid is the part of the work that's about providing material support for people to survive existing systems, like the racist capitalist housing market or the poverty or all the things that are produced by the existing system. So it's material support to survive. And it's only mutual aid if it's based in a shared analysis about root causes, that the problem that causes the crisis is the systems, not the people in crisis. And this really matters because social services and charities usually blame the people in crisis and are like, oh, you need to take a budgeting class, you need to take more medication, or you need to become sober. Like the problem is you, not the racist capitalist housing market. And to me, it's only mutual aid if it includes an invitation to collective action. So you don't have to join our project you don't have to join the group that's supporting people at the encampment to come and get a tent or a bottle of water or charge your phone, but you're invited to. And you're invited to come with us to the protest at the landlord's house on Friday, and you're invited to join. And because fundamentally, mutual aid is based on the belief that we're going to win through organizing and through collective action, not through just, if we just give out enough tents. We're never going to give out enough tents, right? It's like if we keep living under capitalism and white supremacy and all the systems we live under, we're not going to be able to give out enough tents. So we believe in doing the other parts of the movement ecosystem as well, the parts where we actually attack our opponents and stop them from what they're doing. And I think, you know, the themes of this festival are about vulnerability and softness, and I really appreciate that. And those things are really, and care, and those things are really essentially tied to and part of militant tactics that are also about directly attacking our opponents and knowing they are our opponents. Like liberalism tells us to ignore the adversarial relationships between the police and people, between landlords and tenants, between the government and all the governments and all people. And so we're talking about having a kind of mutual aid that includes like a connection to like a very fanged movements, not like defanged movements that are just, you know, hoping that eventually the elites will change their minds. So distinguishing mutual aid from charity, charity generally celebrates rich people, like, oh wow, Bill Gates gave, you know, 50 cents to somebody, like they're so amazing. Let's name a building after a billionaire, etc. Look at how generous. Charity is set up to blame and control people in crisis. Like I was saying, like it's full of eligibility criteria. Sorry, you don't qualify because you're undocumented or because you aren't sober or you don't have children or whatever. Charity divides people into deserving and undeserving. The whole framework is like who is eligible and who is ineligible, and usually related to stigmatized statuses. And charity exists to justify, legitimize, and sustain the existing systems that are causing the polycrises that we've been hearing about, right? Like charity isn't going to resolve those things. It's going to, it like keeps like giving good PR to the, you know, to the billionaires or to the corporations or to the governments that are producing these crises. So a fundamental myth that we live under is that liberation or social change is going to come from elite forces, governments, corporate media, billionaires, etc. And that the thing we need to do is have charismatic leaders appeal to those elites, you know, write really good policy papers, make good documentaries, and change their minds. And then they'll realize, oh my God, war kills children. You know, maybe it's bad to destroy the earth and try to go to space. Going to jail is bad for people. And in this story, in this myth, ordinary people, like the moderator said, just, you know, are supposed to vote, donate, post to social media, maybe once in a while go to a march. In reality, liberation only happens when huge numbers of ordinary people organize to fight back, disrupt, and make it impossible for extraction and violence to continue. Injustice is not a result of misunderstanding. It's a result of domination. They know what they're doing. I think they're a lot more obvious about this than they were like even recently. So now we know they know and don't care. And fundamentally, our job is to make massive resistance and care for each other and build autonomy from their systems. And we have to do that by getting together. And the only way we can do that is if we can actually relate to each other in ways where we can stick together under very, very difficult, stressful conditions, such as repression from our opponents and you know, worsening conditions on all fronts. These myths are really demobilizing, and that's a really difficult piece of this. You know, they're designed to demobilize us. They encourage us to just engage in like passive and symbolic acts, like, oh, I put something on my Instagram about how bad genocide is, so I'm done, you know, and to expect somebody else to save us. I think it's the depth of that expectation, like the psychological intensity of how much, to me, it's a result of living under nation states. Like we really think someone else is going to take care of it. I think this is more so depending on where you've lived and what kinds of states you've lived under. But I think it's a very common, deeply held, often not visible to ourselves belief. And this myth discourages people from bold collective action, which is like the only thing that's going to work. An example of how this myth is told in the US a lot is the story of the Montgomery bus boycott. which was one of the most famous stories of anti-racist action in U.S. history. And it's told as if this woman, Rosa Parks, refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white passenger. And then Martin Luther King Jr. made a lot of speeches. And then, amazingly, the segregation of the buses ended. The story is, of course, much more complicated than that. And it's actually a story about a giant mutual aid project. Like a mutual aid project in which people organized, mostly working class Black women, to move 30,000 Black people to their jobs every day for 18 months, not knowing when it would end, right? So on the left is a picture of this woman, Georgia Gilmore, who was part of a group that did these huge food projects to cook food, to sell it, to raise money, to buy cars, to drive people around. People walked together in groups. Most Black people worked in white neighborhoods and had to commute long distances to work, as nannies and domestics and other types of jobs. And it was dangerous to be engaged in this boycott. And so just thinking about the level of coordination of ordinary people and the risks that people took is profound and really different from the story I was told about just two people making this happen. I just want to also share some images from the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program, probably the most famous mutual aid program in U.S. history. It was considered a very significant threat to the state by the FBI. Famously, J. Edgar Hoover, talked about this, and the police would raid the Black Panther Party offices and destroy the food. The idea of people caring for each other and themselves this way was very threatening. And there's a lot of stories of from people of this time about what it meant to go to the breakfast, to be living in poverty and feel stigmatized for it, and go to this space where people were like, you know what, it's not your fault you're poor, it's white supremacy, let's fight back. And how that brought people into radical movement together. How many people's entry point into the Black liberation struggle with their neighbors was through this message, and the Black Panther Party being an armed resistance framework, as well as this space of care, of doing ambulance and healthcare programs and breakfast and so many other pieces. So broader context for me in this is how we think about government poor relief and disaster relief. I think that there's a widespread fantasy that if we just could get the right people in office, we could have a caregiving state. And in reality, the point of states is to extract and control so that wealth can be concentrated. And the point, certainly, where I live in the United States is it's the cultivation of white settler life. But certainly in Europe, it's also the cultivation of, a broader colonial legacy and a concentration of wealth and control, and forcing people into those relations. And so I really think it's really important to let go of the fantasy of the caregiving state, and especially now when everywhere there's just this outrageous rise of fascism. It's a really useful time to actually just take care of each other and fight back, and stop praying that maybe in the next election we'll have someone better. When the government provides poor relief and disaster relief, it's always conditional. These people can't get it because they're undocumented, etc. Excludes people. And as soon as they settle down any uprising that was leading to the relief, they revoke it, or they just revoke it at any time. So what we're talking about is moving away from having relief be a method of controlling populations, and instead really pursuing autonomy so that we cannot be controlled by them giving and taking back whatever they want at any given time. People often ask whether mutual aid can ever come to scale. This is the most common question I've been asked since I published the book. The idea that, it's just not big enough. And I want people to consider the question of how that imagination of scale, when people ask that, it's often that they think that the only scale that care can happen at is the scale of the state. So they imagine we need a concentrated, centralized power that taxes and redistributes. And what I'm asking you to imagine is a kind of scale that's about tons and tons and tons of local, autonomous, networked projects collaborating. All the research shows that disaster relief is best done at the local level, that the way to meet crisis is with local knowledges. And so if you imagine a kind of scale that's bottom up instead of top down, and that when you do top down, it inevitably requires the deployment of standardized categories, especially nation state oriented standardized categories that exclude lots of people. When you do a bottom up, you can be like, oh, this childcare project is, doing this in the Muslim community and observing these kinds of norms and doing, these kinds of holidays and these kinds of foods. And this childcare project is really focusing on children with these disabilities. And this childcare project is all people who these kids have queer parents. And all of these projects are sharing lots of wisdom and knowledge and trying out different things, but not operating through one narrow standard norm. The other piece of this is the kind of difference between the dragon and the hydra. The idea that instead of being like one centralized hierarchical thing that they can just infiltrate or take out the people on top, that instead we're actually like, we're everywhere and we are not hierarchical and we're not centralized. So they can't just like assassinate a few people. And this was learned by the movements in the US in the 60s and 70s, that it was having a narrow hierarchy led to, it was easier for law enforcement to infiltrate and to take out leadership and disorganize our resistance. So there's a lot of reasons to try to think about scale differently and to try to like let go of our assumptions that care is best managed through centralized authority, and actually notice that it's the reverse. I'm just going to skip this point because I don't run out of time. Okay, yeah, the stakes are really high. We've already been hearing about the polycrises. Yeah, just say a few things. Mutual aid principles that are really common in groups that form to do this work. One is this shared belief that the system, not the people suffering under it, is what creates poverty, crisis, and vulnerability. People engage in a real commitment to the dignity and self-determination of people in crisis, instead of the idea that like we know best, which is the way charity often works. Like we'll tell you what you need and we'll make you do it our way. People engaging in this work do it as a long-term commitment, not a kind of like, oh, I came once on a special holiday and fed people and took a picture, but instead like we are building a project and we're doing it for years and we're learning more and more about what this crisis is like and expanding our solidarity and developing it as we go. Most people went through mutual aid like it is many people's on-ramp, and so trying to create easy ways for people to join. Sometimes you're doing mutual aid work that's highly criminalized and needs to be very secretive. You're moving somebody across a border in a way that's complicated, or you're giving somebody an abortion where it's illegal and you need to have more security. But a lot of mutual aid work, like food projects and childcare projects and things, can really be spaces where we can bring new people in, and we want to do that. Like a lot of people in crisis will start a mutual aid project, 3 or 4 people will start it, and then they'll never ever let more people really take on meaningful roles, and as a result they burn out and it closes down. So really trying to think about how all of our projects can be people building machines that produce more and more people who have wide solidarities and who are part of movements for a lifetime, which includes doing political education in our social movement groups, like helping people move from whatever first brought them in to be like, oh, also, have you thought about how this relates for people with disabilities, or what this is like for people who are facing immigration issues, or like how people can learn to have a broader and broader framework of solidarity. And people need skills about dealing with conflict, like giving and receiving feedback and working together towards repair, instead of having the kind of approaches to conflict encouraged in white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism that are often about throwing people away or judging people, or being unwilling to have humility. Mutual aid projects tend to value transparency and tend to use consensus-based decision-making rather than majority rule or somebody bossing us all around. Happy to talk more about that in the Q&A as well, but these kinds of horizontal and consensus processes are more likely to keep more people engaged longer, instead of most people, this work is unpaid. Most people don't want to go get bossed around. They want to have a say and make the work benefit from as many people's wisdom as possible. Just a few more things. Yeah, so let's speak briefly about NGOization, which is a common problem. There's sometimes, I've seen this happen just recently in Minneapolis, when people are doing all of this rapid response and mutual aid work, sometimes it can be like, oh my God, this is so much. Can we get someone else to do this? Can we get paid to do this? I just want to say a few words about why I think that's not useful. I think this is important. In different countries, people are more and less paid for doing, for arts, for activism. Like there's different structures and schemes in different places. But I think there's a real argument for the dangers of having this work paid and professionalized. And I'll just say a few things about it. Maybe I'll just go a little. Yeah, there's one of the things that gets produced is that you get philanthropic control. So when you start to rely on getting paid, then you only do what the state pays you for, right? And they're not going to pay people to destroy them, which is what we need to do. And you end up having the movements really shaped, and you see this also in the art world, really shaped by what is, who's considered a deserving subject by the philanthropists at the time. And professionalization tends to lead to the idea that, oh, these people are going to deal with it. I don't have to do it. So we have a demobilized and disempowered ordinary people, and then, oh, these special people. And those people are usually talking to elites, and they're pursuing that sort of liberal framework I was describing before about convincing elites. Most NGOization means that we're going to centralize decision-making. There's hierarchy, there's formalism, there's inevitably a lot of racism and sexism in those spaces, careerism, competition about money, elitism. In general, my bottom line here is if we're getting paid, it's almost certainly by our opposition. So we should be concerned about that. And if we don't do anything we don't get paid for, our opposition has total control over us. We've been demobilized, right? If we only do things rich people in the government are into us doing, we're fucked. And almost all resistance work historically has and will be unpaid. If it's just slaves escaping and peasants rising up and workers resisting, it's not, they weren't getting paid for it. Making our resistance work in a way that requires money ends up making it really small and exclusive, and we need it to be really big and participatory because literally we're facing collapse. So it's like if we don't start feeding each other and caring for each other, it's going to be a worse disaster than it already is, and it's already really bad. And so it's this framework of moving away from begging and accommodating the elites to actually attacking and stealing what we need. And this to me is about practicing autonomy. I don't think I have time to give you all these histories, but some histories that I have found useful to read: the history of the Great Dismal Swamp and other maroon communities, the history of squatting, which of course is extensive in Amsterdam and neighboring countries and regions, factory takeovers, people running mutual aid projects using stolen supplies. I really liked this book, Before AIDS. People engaging in pipeline sabotage and other sabotage projects that are aimed at, the attack piece, stopping our opponents, stopping them and caring for us. That's our job. Burning police stations, obviously. It's the anniversary of the burning of the Minneapolis police station in the George Floyd rebellion, I think yesterday or something. I just read this book that I really loved, Tiny Gardens Everywhere. I recommend it as a little bit of inspiration about people being criminalized for engaging in growing their own food in shanty towns. There's more to it than that, but it's got a lot of stuff about both the US and Europe in it. So yeah, just trying to move away from the wage relationship in thinking about how do we do this work. The wage relationship is central to our lives, and it is the thing we have to become freed from. And mutual aid is about imagining a world in which we care for each other so much that we don't have to do what they say. And obviously a lot of it right now is just disaster relief because we're living with so many disasters, the disaster of our communities being deported and imprisoned and all of the disasters happening because of ecological crisis. But I think we could think about it more broadly in terms of actually creating a new way to live that is not organized through the wage relationship, and in which everybody has what they need and nobody has more than what they need. Okay, I think that even though I could go on and on, I'm going to stop because it's been exactly 30 minutes. And we can talk about all the rest of it together. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just invite Rachael Rakes on stage to respond to this beautiful presentation, and we'll talk about it after.
Hi. The hearing's good, yeah, perfect, okay. So I'm going to be responding kind of live to what Dean just presented, also through a pre-prepared, slightly unhinged PowerPoint. It's nice to be prepared, I guess. So my mini talk is entitled Habitual Mutual Rituals, the Easy Way Through Hell. If you don't know about the reference there, basically my collaboration with Alan Carr is non-consensual. I have taken the easy way, which is a trademarked term, from that, and his whole deal is like if you try to, the big thing is if you try to quit smoking at first, like people will jump out from bushes and be like, "Have you read the Easy Way book?" And he made this whole like empire out of it. And I was thinking maybe to start off my idea of mutual aid, which is sometimes, or solidarity, which sometimes leans into stealing, and other things as needed. I would just borrow that from him. So I don't want to belabor the things that you all know, that things are hard right now, but I want to talk about it in a specific way. As individuals, we are often thinking about, and I'm saying we, which is a complicated thing, but we can get into that later. We wake up and are flooded with, all of these different crises, which are kind of intersecting, but that doesn't mean that you can actually deal with them as an intersection idea. And constantly faced with this feeling of like, what's the solution, or what are the solutions, or looking back to like, did this movement, maybe we can go from here. And I want to think about instead, and this is something that I'm going to talk about in terms of my very, very small, contributions thought within my professional curatorial work and my life, that we can wake up and also think about what can I do based on what I have, and think about what I have as abundance. And what if I told you that things could be normal and also potentially normal? I do want to make note that both Dana and I are Americans, which is actually kind of not very, it makes sense in terms of thinking about solidarity and mutual aid in crisis, because it's been, I think, indisputably, the country's been the best from its beginning. Kind of, it's formed the best kind of foreclosure of communalization. A quick example that I'll bring in, which is that the term American exceptionalism, which most read as this, like, this special, everyone being special there and driven and making all this cool stuff. American exceptionalism was actually came out of arguments in the American Communist Party in the 1910s, or maybe 1920, and we're kind of left there. But basically, the idea was, is America too fucked up to like have communism work in the traditional Marxist way? Like, is it just foregone? Are people too selfish and individualized and property craven and detached from the people who are alive at that time in the U.S., detached from their roots or community? That was later taken up, popularized by actually Stalin, who, as soon as he had said it in his speech, American leaders were like, "Oh, we like that," and it's like they were able to rebrand it, as they often do. Just a side note. So what I'm thinking about with the everyday and the minor and the small, I don't necessarily mean that this is a substitute for thinking about what we can do together, and for more radical, potentially disturbing movements, but that operating in the everyday is kind of building a muscle, and it's making a model. And so what kind of, for me, like, I've been working on kind of an actual philosophy around this, and so what kind of foregrounds that is basically the fact that we're here on Earth, we know, or we're thinking more about these days, and I mean in terms of art, art world, theory world, like coming back or coming around to the fact that, oh yeah, we're actually all minerals and bones, and also ecology is not a thing to take care of. It's like actually we're it, and we're just that we're all of this idea of like the crisis and the end of the world is just like it's about suicide, right? It's about human suicide, and it's because of that division. So just to think about that in terms of how that would define the mutual. So it's important to think about the mutual aid means that it's equal. You're not giving, right? You're not like having something be taken from yourself. It's mutually satisfying. You will be taken care of too. It's not an agreement. It's just an overall communal sense, and it doesn't have to be about these sort of bad faith arguments of am I helping somebody for the right reasons? Is it actually it's selflessness that looks like selfishness? My question is, why would you even think about that? Just do what seems right and also seems kind of instinctual and normal. And this is where I come back to the Dutch normalcy as a kind of not a set of laws, but a kind of a societal understanding and how we could build to that. So, and then with that the amount of comfort of feeling like you're somewhat in the mutual to some degree, I think it begins to be possible to be in a space where you're not thinking about solutions, right? Where you're thinking about what you don't know and understanding that we're living in a constant unknowing. And it's just one line which I'm going to read. I can see it on my thing. Oh, did it click? Okay, it's an animation for no reason. Speaking of the unknown, and also in terms of solutions or not, I think another important element, which I won't get into here, is another kind of minor, I guess, are things that seem incredibly innocuous or floral. For instance, poetry. I'm going to read a little bit more from this poem by Sean Bonney. It's a really amazing radical poet who died a few years ago, from his book Letters on Harmony. And it's about harmony and what the undertones of harmony and comparing them to our struggles. At the limit, the gravitational pull that holds the entire system of hierarchical harmony together is an untruth, but an untruth with the power to kill. If this untruth is the site of justification in the corporate, i.e. ritual slaughter, it is also the site, magnetic as all hell, of contention and repulsion, which can transgress its own limits until something quite different, namely crime or impossibility, appears. For Ernst Bloch, the revolution was the crossroads where the dead come to meet. For Lorca, music was the scream of dead generations, the language of the dead. But our system of harmony knows so well it contains its own negation that it has mummified it, and we know we live within that criminal harmony. But we also know we are held helplessly within it, as fixed subjects of an alien music. But never mind. Just as poetry is useless only because it stays within the limits of the already known, so the hidden harmony is better than the obvious. How much do I have? When we start? 10, 5? Are we halfway through?
I think there's a timer.
What? I have 4. No way. I don't think I can talk to you about this stuff so much, but let's see. I'll do this really quick. Okay, I'll do this. So I wanted to just briefly bring in some of the ways that I've been able to work on this stuff within my work. And that's to say that the things I've been doing, I knew this wasn't going to work. Damn it! It's supposed to be a full one animation. It's running out of time. The work I've long been doing is not necessarily ostensibly, it's not topically political. It's not about themes or necessarily. There's lots of different specific researches, but the overall ideas are like basically investigating investigating the measurement kind of systems and the organizing systems of Western rationalism, and kind of just putting it there because we can imagine what they have done. So this is a linear time, mapping space, the idea of like purity and the hardness of a number or the softness of a letter, the difference between a computer and a flower, these kinds of things. And along with that, since, well, I should say, I learned about mutual aid when I was 19, and as a working class American, I couldn't go to college for a very long time until I figured things out. But meanwhile, I got to at least start working at an anarchist collective press, and had an amazing education, not only in the kind of politics on paper, but actually these kinds of decision making, how to have how to deal with the hierarchies inherent in seemingly non-hierarchical structures, how to understand that there's going to be dissensus with respect. And so I got a sense of that, and a lot of that has brought me, or it's helped to maybe give a term to maybe an impulse that's already been there, maybe that you share this kind of feeling. But I started this idea that I never really told anyone about. It wasn't important, but it was I had an ethos called the commune of daily life, and I kind of still have it, but it was like a list of like all the things that one might share or that we could think about that we could share. And it doesn't have to be necessarily, like giving, but I just thought like, started taking care of my friends' dogs when they were away, so they didn't have to hire somebody. But like, this is good for me too. Like, I'm like, I get to be with a dog. I don't have to own a dog. They get this, and thinking about all these kinds of mutual things, right? And so that has built into kind of a parallel practice between art and activism, where I've been able to do work with other kind of art activists to figure out little like means of sharing. And so this is supposed to be an animation, but so if you if you look into the corner, like for instance, when I came here from 15 years in New York, and it was one of the last projects I worked on was a system where with the Metro card, the card that you use to swipe in to get to the MTA, which is a ridiculously horrible and overpriced system. We figured out a way to offer kind of for free, to find a loophole basically in the law about how to give people who needed to ride for free to do that without even taking anything away from us. And that came through like a series of buttons that we would wear. You would have like a monthly pass, and as soon as you're walking out, you'd like show your button to somebody because there was always people like hanging out asking for a swipe. So instead of asking, because you can't ask, that's the key thing, you could have an unspoken thing. It's like lots of little things like this. We'll put it in the back. So this is this map in the back is a map of the Wi-Fi passwords to airport lounges, which is not something I worked on, but I worked on a bathroom map of New York City, stuff like this, as well. Thinking about the question of just always carrying some money around, which for just my feeling was if someone asks you for something, they probably need it, and the idea of like, what if they do something different? I don't think maybe we could fight about this, but it's just an elemental thing. Would it take someone to actually come up and ask you for something? It's just best to give it. And this is part of a poem from the Argentine poet Alexander Pizarnik, and I like the way that she puts this. So yeah, it's like asking me for the moon. I tell myself, if someone is asking for the moon, it's because they need it. So some of this work in a more on the surface way, I can show from my a long time collaboration I've had with the artist Shauna Van Heeswick, that many of you here probably know who she is. And this precedes my working with her at the Basis of Artswerkkunst in Utrecht, but where I started working in 2019, but really was able to come kind of into a fruition there, and I could learn a lot from her. So Jana, in short, is what we have to call like a social practice artist who has been also working in the realm of loopholes and kind of using art, although I find this to be art more so than many social practice arts, finding loopholes to call something art or based on a commission, or loopholes just in a law with the community, to really actually change, to make lasting changing things within it, like structures within a community. And so one example is a bakery called Home Baked on the outskirts of Liverpool that was going to close, and her commission for the Liverpool Biennial was used to not just save the home baked, but actually turn it into a kind of base for organizing and care and aid and pie giving that would last and would manage to actually like make the community sustain, and it did, and it's been 10 years now or more. And so Angela, who I feel bad that I should have made her turn her camera down on Zoom, but this was early. These were early pandemic days. Angela McKay is from Home Baked, and this is the last kind of example I'll give. This was a endeavor that I started at Bach as part of an online journal, and where I invited different mutual aid groups, people who were helping really with just like triage stuff during the pandemic, to just come and speak online. And basically, it was like we had we had extra money left over, for presenting things. And it was finding ways to use it, but then finding ways also to give it to people who needed it for mutual aid. And so always thinking about how to do all of these things. And so with Jana, her work in the Afrikaner Weg, another kind of community thing in Rotterdam, and Home Baked were part of this. And like, yeah, this is kind of just an ongoing way I'm trying to work. And I'm just going to read you this because it's fun. So back to poems. Once in a while you joke, you say, violence is the only answer, and laugh. But the truth is, you never made a joke in your life. You only say you're joking to avoid termination, institutionalization, and more. And even now you're right, just kidding, only joking. But it's true, you've meant every word. Always you mean every word. Just kidding. Violence is never the answer, just kidding. Violence is the answer, just kidding, amen. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much for the ride. Now we have to sit and talk. Okay, no, let's be here. We don't have so much time, but this is beautiful. Dean is back. Hello, can you see us, Dean?
Yeah.
Hi, Dean.
Beautiful. Well, okay, we have 10 minutes, so I'll try to ask slightly rapid fire questions.
I prepped for 20. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take
No worries. This is normal.
I don't know why I'm whispering on the mic.
This is one of the polycrises you have to live through.
Time.
Time is the enemy.
Yeah. Time is
money. I have a few like very contradicting questions, but it's not out of ill intention or anything. I think the first thought I was confronted with, also listening to Dean's talk, is a type of fragility of the myths that you have described, right? So to me, I thought immediately of all of these proxy systems that are institutional and so on. 2011, during the Arab Spring, in Egypt, where the whole security system collapsed, right? The state has kind of rescinded itself from the streets. They opened all the prisons. Immediately, within 2 hours, 3 hours, there was nationwide community, how do you say it? I don't know, groups that were like guarding the streets, taking care of each other, providing that sense of security. What, especially in the Western society, what keeps this illusion alive and strong? Why is it not as fragile when it keeps failing us? That is the first question.
Fear.
Fear.
Fear. Yeah. The weaponization and the action of fear. Yeah. But it was for Dean.
Yeah. No, it's for both of you. I'm
I mean, yeah. That's me.
I mean, that's actually, I think it's just profound how relentlessly oriented towards caring for each other humans are, and how far governments have to go to stop us from doing it. And so the histories of criminalizing forms of communal care, and that's why I'm enjoying that book, Tiny Gardens Everywhere, because it's partly about like the enclosure of the commons at various places and how people lived when there were commons, and then how when they got rid of them, people would just create that through shanty towns on the edges of every city, and because it's the best way to live and make sure you have food. And the things that governments would do to try to stop people from doing that, to try to force them into control by employers through wage labor. Like, so to me, it's like, this is what we were made to do. But I think it's very common to be told people are naturally greedy, people are dangerous, we need police, we need militaries, we need systems to keep poor people away from rich people. Like, these mythologies, even about ourselves and our nature, feed this fear that you're talking about. And I think part of what the conversation at Mutual Aid has to do is confront people's deep faith in hierarchies, states, billionaires, shitty systems, and like restore faith in ourselves and each other that we've been told by like tons of violent TV shows and movies, you know, we should be scared of each other.
Okay. So we're saying that there is a whole system manufactured to drive us away from our default state, which is care. I think then my second question is really about the immediate effects of systematic repression, of grief that we feel in the face of loss, in the face of crises, in the face of like systematic alienation. And I think here of like Audre Lorde's radical self-care, right? Which to me is like, we talk about mutual aid, but what does first aid look like? How do we kind of put on our own, what do you call it, life oxygen mask before we reach out to others?
I think one answer to that also is that a part of, at least for me, like a part of the kind of small things you can think about is to not be afraid to ask for help also, and to put yourself in that role of first being what we say is vulnerable now, but hopefully is normal later, is to be like, also, I need help now, and to just, you know, engage in that is one.
Yeah. So how does that look like in a kind of more institutional or like movement?
In terms of the way that I think in terms of an activist movement, or in terms of a general.
I think let's say activism or community work, because that to me sometimes is asking for funding, right? Which we know is a trap.
We need resources.
Yeah.
I mean, resources have to exist, but I don't know if it's asking for funding necessarily. There are other ways. But
yeah. Dean?
Yeah, I think that one of the mythologies of like medicalization and of ways that care and health are described is that it's perceived as like an individual issue. And so the idea of like, I have to care for myself so that I can care for others, misses that those things are intertwined. Most people who start to engage in community work actually are less isolated, and therefore their lives get better. So like, there's a lot of care in being connected to others, and the sort of vision of self-care as like isolation, go take a bath, go buy something, do things that make you feel good, is one of the things I think we have to fight in this time. Like that sense of self-care has really been co-opted. And so this is what my new book is about like, it's not like it's easy to work with other people on things you care about. It's fucking so hard. And how do we actually let these processes of collective decision making and caring like develop us and grow us, so that we move from being people who've been socialized to be individuals and to be consumers, to instead be people who are socializing ourselves and each other on what it takes to like have disagreements in a group and still try things, and like show solidarity even when someone's annoying, and like even when someone's hurt your feelings, and like figure out what's my business and what's something you're actually doing. Like all of those really complex skills I think are actually best practice in group spaces, because our wounds come from group spaces, like our families and hospitals. So to me, there's a way we could further integrate the sense of caring for ourselves, including getting the stuff we need. I really am talking about trying to do this work without money. I really am. Really.
Yeah, and there are a lot of, the more that we kind of grow these things, there are a lot of things here that you can do without money. I'm not saying it's possible now, but you realize what's here. you know. And then just a quick shout out to patriarchy. Also, it's like something to really deal with. And yeah, and I think just besides the individuation, hyper individuation of like social media era and how people think that like they have to be right in a precise way, it's very anti like compromise, getting together. Just like again going back to like not thinking there's a solution to find, like realizing that like things are so whacked out that like we are in the time of the unknown and we must embrace it.
I mean, to me, what I'm learning already from this answer is that vulnerability, asking for help, engaging in that kind of work is in itself healing, right? Is really in itself. That's a mutuality of it, right? Because I think I didn't. It was definitely there, but I think we could also stress more on this is not an extractive process where someone with more capacity gives to someone with less capacity and it's one directional. It is not. It's always relational in that sense. I don't want to hog all the questions, so does anyone in the audience have a rapid fire question? Yes, Meta.
Hey Dean, my name is Meta. I have a question for you. I never live in your country, but I find it really interesting that you put your presentation that mental health professionals trained barbershops so they can communicate better with their clients. I find it really, I want to ask you, do you reject science? Because I think the logical continuation of your presentation comes to seeing science as a way of oppression, as a tool for like ruling elite, or I don't know how you describe there, to dominate the mindset of the people. And especially the mental health as an area, like arose in capitalist societies. I don't know, I come from a Muslim country, we don't have mental health professionals. We seek help from family members. And I see a correlation between having mental health professionals and also mental health issues in communities. Maybe rejecting the science itself and seeing it as a way of oppression, especially in such communities that you operate or we see examples, is a way of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Yeah, I've been very inspired by the anti-psychiatry movement and by movements that are questioning institutionalized expertise. Like, one of the ways this works is that oftentimes mutual aid is criminalized because there's some kind of regulatory system that says you can't do childcare unless you have a license. You can't do mental health care unless you have a license. You can't give abortions unless you have a license. And these regulations are supposed to keep people safe, but they actually solidify usually like very racialized and gendered and classed orientations about who can do certain things, and they make certain people criminalizable. So for me, it's not about rejecting all science. It's about noticing how the processes of institutionalization and government control and capital take knowledges and limit who can practice them in ways that have patterns that we all want to resist. And so what's interesting is watching people liberate those knowledges and wisdoms, whether that's like people making their own medicine. There's a huge amount of people in the US making trans healthcare and reproductive healthcare available non-professionally because they're becoming more and more criminalized and hard to get. So making our own hormones, making our own abortion pills, that kind of work, I think, is really the cutting edge of where we have to go under these conditions. And those kinds of things people have been doing in many ways for a very long time because of the stranglehold that capital has on the things we need. So it's less about rejecting the knowledges of science, but more about asking like what constraints are around how they're produced and disseminated.
I would even, if I would add to that, I always really reference this book a lot. It's like We've Never Been Modern by Bruno Latour. And I think the argument is actually not rejecting science in itself, but rejecting modernity, because it positions science in a way vis-a-vis these kind of oppressive structures, because it's never that objective.
Can I just say, like, science, the way that science is done, the way that science is like most commonly done around the world now, it's one way of doing it. It's cool. It's very smart. But like, there are other ways of doing science, and we can have them, like, they can all exist. And that's all.
Yeah. I think one maybe question to wrap it up. I think there's a lot of people in the audience working for cultural organizations. They're really balancing like frugality. They're really balancing precarity with also the fear of getting co-opted by these myths. What is maybe one imperative piece of advice that you would both give people trying to operate, either professionally or personally, these two kind of counter movements?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all tied to institutions in different ways. I work at a university, right?
Yeah.
And the only like ethical thing to do in the context of the university that Moten and Harney say is to steal, you know? And so how can we orient towards the institutions we're tied to think, how can we get the stuff out of here to people who don't have it? How can we get things in here that are, you know, not allowed? Like, what is the way to be fundamentally accountable to our communities and people in crisis and not to institutions?
I love stealing as kind of a main, because I mean, business is also theft. We don't recognize it as so.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's so many steal, like especially like Americans are really habituated to like the hustle of like just finding ways to get things that I often feel bad when I talk to people here about. But in an art context, let's say, maybe this is a lot of the audience is doing. I think taking the vulnerability, and I understand that it's such risky times, but to also finding loopholes in culture and ways to move things around, but also in the institution that you're hired as a freelancer for or working in terms of who's being, like, how are people doing mentally within that institution, how stealing things, and how you can be kind of together and model things within, like not just what you're presenting, but how else can you use the space? Okay, so like you work at a gallery, and it closes at 6. Who can you trust to give keys to at night to do something else, to make, if there's a kitchen, to make food, just to find ways, like without exhausting yourself, but just to find ways to make use of these resources that are like actually like really, a kitchen can be something that is the thing that that prevents somebody from being helpful. So.
No, I think we've done two things, and I think we've shown evidence that solidarity, mutual aid works. And I think, to me, the next step that we need to engage in with more is the imagination aspect of it. I think part of it is being able to imagine, with the resources that I have, with the kind of the limited space that I have, how can I kind of forge my way into a mutual aid situation. One of the tragedies of this moment is that we have to get kicked out of this space. So I want to thank you both for being so generous and sharing your thoughts, your work, for crowning this day and setting up the next. We have a full day of talks tomorrow. I hope you can also tune in. Thank you so much, Dean, for joining. I don't know what time it is where you are, but thank you for being here. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you to the festival also for being able to respond. It's
absolutely,
really
absolutely.
Lovely.
I think it is both a necessity and a luxury to have settings like we are in now. So, big thanks to you.
Use it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please get out of here, and I'll see you tomorrow.